All right, so this next story that I wanted to get into is surrounding Tucker Carlson sort of making his comeback of sorts after being unceremoniously fired from Fox News in the aftermath of that $787 million Dominion Voting Systems lawsuit that put Fox in an absolutely terrible financial position. So he's making his comeback here. He's not going to Newsmax. He's not going to Rumble or any number one of the other, potential platforms that we thought maybe he would go to. He's actually making his comeback on Twitter, as it seems like Elon is attempting to roll out more of like a long form content type of thing, but we'll get to all of that. I think it's very interesting that he's choosing Twitter. Obviously, he also, leaving Fox News had some sort of non-compete agreement behind the scenes that probably prevented him from going to other major outlets, but maybe didn't prevent him, I guess, from going to Twitter. So we have this video that he dropped to basically launch this off, and we are just going to have to go through this like bit by bit because there's so much to talk about within this video. So let's just go ahead and jump into this first part of it. Here we have Tucker Carlson announcing his comeback.
Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. You often hear people say the news is full of lies, but most of the time that's not exactly right. Much of what you see on television or read the New York Times is in fact true in the literal sense. It could pass one of the media's own fact checks. Lawyers would be willing to sign off on it. In fact, they may have. But that doesn't make it true. It's not true. At the most basic level, the news you consume is a lie of the stealthiest and most insidious kind. Facts have been withheld on purpose, along with proportion and perspective.
Okay, I just want to pause on that for a second. We're getting lectured by Tucker Carlson on proportionate coverage within the mainstream media. Okay, this is the same guy who spent like a whole week talking about how the woke mob is preventing M&Ms from being sexy anymore. The M&Ms they're not fuckable anymore, I guess, was the point of that monologue that he was doing. I mean, you want to talk about proportionality? I mean, come on, dude. That's kind of like your whole shtick is blowing things out of proportion. But he continues here.
If you are being manipulated. How does that work? Let's see. If I tell you that a man has been unjustly arrested for armed robbery, that is not, strictly speaking, a lie. He may have been framed. At this point, there's been no trial, so no one can really say. But if I don't mention the fact that the same man has been arrested for the same crime 6 times before, am I really informing you? No, I'm not. I'm misleading you. And that's what the news media are doing in every story that matters, every day of the week, every week of the year.
Okay, again, just got to pause on it. I mean, first of all, what he's saying there is not necessarily wrong. That is a pretty accurate description of how corporate media works. I mean, we all understand that, but it's the fact that it's coming from Tucker Carlson, right? If you didn't know who Tucker Carlson was, if this was just some nameless, faceless person, then what he's saying, I don't necessarily have a problem with so far. But we're talking about Tucker Carlson, okay? The same Tucker Carlson who's now describing this process of how the media withholds some sort of information and gives you only small portions of it. This is the same guy who on a regular basis on Fox News would be constantly, sensationalizing the smallest of petty thefts in some San Francisco Walgreens store while refusing to tell people on his network about, let's say, wage theft, corporate wage theft, which is a far greater problem in scale in the United States of America. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars that are just taken out of the pockets of average working class people. Does Tucker Carlson talk about that? I mean, we don't even really treat that as a real crime in this country. But that's a perfect example of the type of phenomenon that he was just describing there, right? Where you're hyper-focusing on one aspect of it that's not necessarily wrong at the surface level, but you're also sort of not talking about some of the more broader, structural issues that average Americans are facing. But he continues here.
What's it like to work in a system like that? After more than 30 years in the middle of it, we could tell you stories. The best you can hope for in the news business at this point is the freedom to tell the fullest truth that you can. But there are always limits. And you know that if you bump up against those limits often enough, you will be fired for it. That's not a guess, it's guaranteed.
That part, again, not necessarily wrong. I mean, I can give you a specific example here as pointed out by Democracy Now!, the famous story of Phil Donahue, who used to work back on MSNBC during the run-up to the Iraq War. He was a very, prominent anti-war voice on the network, and they fired him for it. So yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. The mainstream corporate media does sort of control the Overton window of what is acceptable within that sphere. They don't want to allow you to talk about anything that's going to piss off the establishment or piss off their advertisers or hurt their bottom line in any way, shape, or form. That's because they're capitalists, they are corporations, and that's their priority. So that aspect of it, not necessarily wrong. Of course, highly recommend you go read Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. It'll give a much more detailed explanation than what I'm doing or what Tucker's doing right now. But again, not necessarily wrong on that point, right?
Every person who works in English language media understands that. The rule of what you can't say defines everything. It's filthy, really, and it's utterly corrupting. You can't have a free society if people aren't allowed to say what they think is true. Speech is the fundamental prerequisite for democracy. That's why it's enshrined in the first of our constitutional amendments. Amazingly, as of tonight, there aren't many platforms left that allow free speech. The last big one remaining in the world, the only one, is Twitter, where we are now. Twitter has long served as the place where our national conversation incubates and develops. Twitter is not a partisan site. Everybody's allowed here, and we think that's a good thing. And yet, for the most part, the news that you see analyzed on Twitter comes from media organizations that are themselves thinly disguised propaganda outlets. You see it on cable news, you talk about it on Twitter. The result may feel like a debate, but actually the gatekeepers are still in charge. We think that's a bad system. We know exactly how it works, and we're sick of it. Starting soon, we'll be bringing a new version of the show we've been doing for the last 6.5 years to Twitter. We'll be bringing some other things too, which we'll tell you about. But for now, we're just grateful to be here. Free speech is the main right that you have.
Okay, so that's basically it. Now, obviously, at the end there, he says that Twitter is sort of like the free speech beacon of the world. Twitter, okay, under Elon Musk's leadership. We're talking about the same Twitter that has been basically bending the knee to, for example, the Narendra Modi government in India when there was a BBC documentary that was unfavorable to Modi and he wanted it taken down. Twitter complied with that. I mean, is this the standard that you're talking about for so-called free speech? This is something that Elon Musk has referenced in the past, that he's basically just going to abide by whatever the laws are in any given country. Okay, that's not a principled stance on free speech, right? Are you going to go by whatever the Saudi Arabian government wants you to censor within their country on Twitter? That's not free speech. I mean, obviously they're different countries with different laws, but if you're taking a principled stance on it, then that shouldn't make a difference, right? I mean, in the United States, if Congress was to come out and pass some sort of a law restricting some form of speech, are you going to abide by that because that's just what the law says? I mean, it's completely ridiculous to hold that as a standard. But the even more important point of this, okay, can't speak right now. The more important point of what's happening on Twitter right now is even funnier because Elon Musk is literally charging people to speak on Twitter, or at least to get a broader audience on Twitter. If you go on Twitter right now, okay, and you look at some of the most viral tweets or whatever, and you go and you look at the reply section to them, all of the top replies, regardless of whether or not they're good replies or funny replies or substantive replies or anything like that, are blue subscribers, Twitter blue subscribers, okay? Because Elon Musk has set up a system where if you refuse to pay him $8 or $11 per month, depending on which platform you're on mobile or on PC, if you don't pay him that monthly subscription fee, your content on Twitter gets suppressed, okay? Your speech on Twitter gets suppressed by the algorithm, and vice versa is true as well. If you pay him that fee, okay, you pay him his little bribe, your stuff gets promoted in the algorithm. That is not only not free speech, I mean, it's not free speech metaphorically or even literally, because you're requiring that people pay for that speech, or at least for their speech to be seen. It's not a meritocratic system. So no, of course, Twitter is not the gold standard for what free speech looks like. I mean, it's a complete fucking joke on that side of it, right? But then, I mean, we also have so many other aspects of this that are worth talking about, right? We're talking about Tucker Carlson here, who, is trying to pretend as if he is somehow genuine as opposed to all of these different corporate media outlets or corporate stooges on MSNBC or CNN or even Fox News. Like, we know who you are, man. Okay, you did this for decades. And just to give you a perspective on exactly how Tucker sort of became who he is right now with this fake populist shtick that he does, okay, here's a clip from back in 2003, as pointed out here by TYT, where he was basically describing how Bill O'Reilly, who in some ways was sort of like the Tucker Carlson 1.0, and he's the 2.0 now, but he's talking about how Bill O'Reilly was putting on a shtick, and he was a complete fraud, and if that fraud was ever exposed, then he would come crumbling down. So let's hear it directly from Tucker Carlson himself.
Another quote from your book: Bill O'Reilly's success is built on the perception that he really is who he claims to be. If he ever gets caught out of character, it's over.
That's right.
Okay. So again, and he went on further in that quote. You can go look up the quote to get the entirety of it, where he's basically basically coming out and saying, if Bill O'Reilly was ever to, treat one of his, a waiters or a staff member badly and it got caught on camera, then everybody would know that he's an elitist snob and he's not some average working class person, pretending to be like the representative of the average American, right? That is exactly the formula that Tucker Carlson took. He looked at what Bill O'Reilly was doing, called him a complete fraud, and then realized, hey, I can kind of do that myself. And that's exactly the type of profile that he was trying to build on Fox News. And he was honestly wildly successful at it. But we know who you are. You are a multimillionaire. You come from an extremely wealthy background. You are the elitist that you pretend to rail against on a regular basis, okay? All you do is defend the elites. Now, there will be some issues marginally where he's willing to call out and break sort of from the establishment of the Republican Party or of, Wall Street or whatever the case may be. But broadly, we understand what his underlying agenda is, and that is to defend the wealthiest billionaires and corporations within society. Okay, so that's just a preview of what Tucker Carlson used to be like. Now, there's another aspect of this that I just want to touch on real quick, because again, part of the reason why people are basically speculating that Tucker Carlson is going to Twitter instead of to, Rumble or Newsmax or any other ones that have offered him some of these contracts. I think the PBD podcast that Kyle recently went on, the network that, hosts the PBD podcast was offering Tucker some sort of contract. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars that are on the table for him right now. So why would he choose Twitter? Well, part of the argument that he's putting forward as to why he's allowed to even make this show on Twitter in the first place is that he's saying that some of these leaked text messages that we've all been covering over the last number of weeks, as it's sort of just been drip feeding out, he's basically arguing that the fact that these got leaked by presumably Fox News, at least that's what he's insinuating. I kind of agree with him. It was most likely somebody at Fox that was leaking these text messages and videos, but by leaking that information, they violated the contract. Fox did, and so that basically nulls out any sort of like non-compete agreement that he had signed, and then he would be able to come back and do some form of his show now instead of having to wait until his contract expires. Okay, so that's the argument that he's putting forward. Some of these texts were, obviously completely insane. I mean, one of these, as they point out here by Vox, was, pretty racist. He was talking about some alleged Antifa member who was in the streets of Washington, D.C. And he's basically, as they point out here, saying that he has a feeling of a certain vicious bloodlust while watching the video. And he says, I really wanted them to hurt the kid, but then realizes that's a terrible response to have in that situation. And he says, I should remember that somewhere somebody probably loves this kid and would be crushed if he was killed. But they say the most important line is one where he describes the attack in racial terms, saying jumping a guy like that is dishonorable. Obviously, it's not how white men fight. So I guess just kind of implying that like white men fight honorably in like a duel or like a hand-to-hand combat type of situation or something like that, whereas non-white people tend to like jump people in groups and attack as a coordinated thing, I guess, and they're more like barbaric or vicious or something like that. I mean, it's obviously like pretty racist at face value, but this is just one example of some of the things that have been leaked, and clearly it's intended, it seems like, to make Tucker look somewhat bad. We also had some other bizarre ones where, like in this leaked video, he was saying that somebody who he was doing an interview with, I guess, the wife or the spouse of that person was yummy, and that she looked, I guess she was good looking or something like that. And so that was another thing that dropped. That was bizarre. And then he had a screaming match with Mediaite and was saying, like, fuck you, Mediaite, or something like that. So we had a couple different things that were leaked. And so Tucker's, again, making the argument that this basically validates his push to start this new show on Twitter. Now, we also had Fox News basically send out something to Media Matters, who were the initial group that dropped some of these leaked videos, and it was a cease and desist type thing, and they said stop publishing these leaked Tucker Carlson videos. I happen to think that this is kind of bullshit, because I do think that they, somebody in Fox News was probably leaking these to the press. But anyways, we get back to this main thing here, which is that, why is Tucker deciding to go to Twitter? And it seems pretty obvious that, like, although he's coming out and making this argument that Fox News violated this agreement, maybe he doesn't want to go and have some sort of major, legal battle with Fox News as a network, right? He's in a very difficult position right now. It could be possible that he's correct, that they were the ones that were leaking these text messages, as he's trying to make as an argument right here. That may be correct, but you're also choosing to go on Twitter, which is kind of weird because you have all of these different other media organizations that are offering millions and millions of dollars as a part of these proposed contracts. So it's definitely a very interesting situation. I'm waiting to see how this is going to play out. I don't even know that Twitter is capable of putting out long form content on like a daily basis in a way that's really monetizable to a large extent. Also, obviously on Fox News, Tucker Carlson's audience, the average age was probably like 65 or something like that. Twitter as a platform has a lot more younger people. So is he going to be able to get even remotely close to what his numbers used to be? Is he going to be making even remotely close to as much money from that type of ad revenue that Twitter is capable of bringing in? I mean, it's honestly a lot going on here, but I'm definitely here for it. It's going to be interesting to see. And I'm sure that his show is going to be promoted in the Twitter algorithm. It's going to be all over everybody's pages. So that part of it's going to be an absolute nightmare, but we'll keep you guys updated as we get more info on this.
Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.